Hello, welcome. This is Headlocks and Headphones. My name is, of course, Martin Anderson. Thank you to everybody who tuned into the last episode, making it our highest rated episode ever, which is fabulous. I think that's something to do with the fact that a lot of people wanted to find out the words that Murphy had to say, which is great. But coming up this week, we are going to be having a little bit of TakeOver, a little bit of NXT and AEW. For the first time in a while, I actually watched both NXT and AEW, so I can talk about them a little bit. However, I'm not happy. Find out why soon. We're also going to look at Raw. I didn't catch SmackDown this weekend, so there's no point in me really wasting your time pretending I did. But we are going to talk about the stuff that happened on Raw as well. For me, it's been a very positive wrestling week. I think nothing's been outrageously bad, with the exception of a couple of things on one of the midweek shows. I'm not going to tell you what. So to give you a little bit of a heads up, one of the shows I found actually offensive, and the other show I found kind of blah. By blah, I mean it wasn't horrible, but there was nothing that would make me want to tune in. So we're going to talk about that very soon. But first, we're going to talk about the wrestling news. The wrestling news. This is the part that every week I always end up getting myself so riled up. So this week, let's not get too riled up. Let's try and keep news a little bit light and exciting. So let's open up with Joey fucking Ryan. So the latest on the lawsuit against Impact Wrestling, which, by the way, I'm fully on Impact Wrestling side on this one. There are other things that Impact Wrestling got wrong, but Joey Ryan deserves everything he gets. After they terminated his contract following allegations of sexual abuse, Joey Ryan filed for wrongful termination. This happened in September, and obviously I've spoken about this at length, but Ryan has actually requested judgment in his favor from the district court in Tennessee because he claims Impact had 30 days with an additional 30-day extension to respond to his lawsuit from September 24th. In the response made on December 4th, Impact Wrestling denied all of the allegations against him, arguing that Ryan's contract ran through August 2021 unless earlier terminated. In defense of his client, Joey Ryan's lawyer stated Impact is not an incompetent or a minor, but failed to answer the lawsuit in an appropriate amount of time. So he wants to win based on the technicality that they didn't respond. There's a lot wrong with Joey Ryan in terms of his approach to this. Here's a guy who says he's made $1 million from wrestling. Surely he could accept that he was very lucky to make that money based on the gimmick that he had. Certainly, the video that he put out is very akin to the video that Mike Quackenbush put out, in the sense that they try and bombard you with all this detail to kind of make you feel like they're defending themselves. But if you've watched the Mike Quackenbush one especially, it's very staged, it's very forced, it's very monotone as well. Joey Ryan's one, particularly the fact that, you know, there are situations that he's accused of that he actually accepts happened, but perhaps he remembers them slightly differently. Hopefully, the people who have allegations against Joey Ryan are looking into the best way to look after themselves, because that's kind of the important thing here. And Joey Ryan seems only concerned about making sure he has money, which, you know, we all need to feed our families. We all need to look after ourselves. But for him to go out of his way to sue because he was released, he had sexual assault allegations against him, and any company that want to be associated with somebody with those level of allegations, we're not talking about one allegation against him. We're talking about several. We're talking about some of the things he's actually admitted to. He stopped short of admitting rape, because obviously that would be insane to admit that publicly. But very much like certain other talents, I'm not going to mention too many of them, but Jack Gallagher especially, who released a statement several weeks ago basically saying that he's spoken with his wife over everything and tried to come to terms with it himself. Based on the allegations, I don't think it's Jack Gallagher that needs to come to terms with things. I think Joey Ryan's in a very similar place. Now, I do want to try and avoid getting too worked up this week, but Joey Ryan pisses me off. I think there's something wrong when somebody wants to profit from a situation like what is happening. And I think Joey Ryan's the kind of person who will try and profit off of this, which is shameful. If you're a wrestling promoter and you book Joey Ryan, I'm done. I'm never going to watch your promotion again. Certainly, there's other people out there. If you book talent like Joey Ryan, especially in light of the fact that he's admitted to chunks of the allegations, then you're putting money over people's safety as well. I think just now, if you're a wrestling promoter, safety. Put on shows that entertain people, but try and be safe. Let's try and make sure everybody that works these shows are going to be as safe as physically possible. Now, I know PVG checks are being discussed, but they only catch those that have been caught. There are a lot of people who are part of that speaking out movement, and I don't want to speak for other people. I certainly wouldn't want to speak for Murphy, who was very brave in coming out with some of the allegations that he did, but obviously prevented himself from further retribution by not mentioning his former trainer by name. Although, I tried to say to him, what's the worst that this person is going to do? Because we can try and get it out there and make sure that as a community, the wrestling community can protect you. But he's still too scared to do so. So if a wrestling promotion books somebody like Joey Ryan, knowing the bullying and the allegations against him, or book a Jack Gallagher, knowing what he did, and book some of the other guys, particularly the one from New Zealand who was let go by WWE, these people may grow. They may get past this. And that's important for them to get past what they've went through. But it's also important for the wrestling business to move on from these people. That's it. I'm going to leave that there because I think we've all spoken about it, and we're all kind of possibly at the end of our tether when it comes to the speaking out movement, in the sense that it's brave that people have come out and said what they have to say, but we almost seem kind of on pause right now. And I think when shows get going again and we can show everybody that, wrestling's a family. We get called so many names as wrestling fans that it's cool to think we can actually look after each other. Now, talking about looking after each other, let's move on. Dakota Kai is called that fan who blasted the NXT women's division. Now, the fan on Twitter said, AEW's women's division has more personality than NXT's, hands down. NXT's women's division can be divided in two categories: buff women who look like men, and Japanese talent who dress and act like they're in a bad pantomime. Have you seen the AEW women's division? I'm not even going to mention Dakota Kai's defense right now. I'll mention that in a second. But they're talking about the fact that it's lots of Japanese talent in the NXT women's division. Have you seen who the women's champion is in AEW? Have you seen former champions in AEW? Have you seen the roster? They're talking about people dressed in bad pantomime. You just need to look at this week's AEW to see a bad pantomime. Anyway, this was how Kai responded. I'm sure the AEW ladies wouldn't appreciate your misogynistic views either, which very obviously stem from insecurities and low self-worth. There isn't really 100 things you can say to somebody because wrestling's subjective. I think the NXT women's roster is far superior to the AEW women's roster in many ways. However, I do believe there are women on the AEW roster who are better than women on the NXT roster, and vice versa. There isn't you have to like one and not the other. There's good and bad about both, and I certainly think over the next couple of months, the women's division is going to have a big part to play in that Wednesday night battle. I certainly think that the NXT characters are more established. Rhea Ripley, Tony Storm, especially Raquel Gonzalez. These people are very capable of putting on good shows. Whereas in AEW, you have people who are better at the wrestling side of things than you have in NXT as well. So it depends what flavor you're into that week. I've watched AEW some weeks, and I think the women's division has been incredible. And then later on, I'll watch the NXT show, and I think, do you know what? No, the wrestling might be better here, or these two characters might be better, but there's some weeks NXT is better, and that's how it's going to be. Now, NXT is obviously, for me, the one show that has the biggest reputation. The last show that had a big reputation that was kind of underneath the radar was Ring of Honor. Now, they are running their Final Battle event prior to the TV tapings, and they have everybody in a bubble in Baltimore, and they did post a video of the 2004 match with CM Punk and Steve Corino versus Generation Next. I encourage you to go out of your way onto the Ring of Honor YouTube and check that. I may even try and stick a link down underneath for that so that everybody can see how good these people really are. And CM Punk and Steve Corino are two of my top 10 wrestlers, and a lot of people don't know Steve Corino very well because he was never really on national television to any great degree during most of the people viewing this as wrestling viewership. But Steve Corino, former NWA champion, AWA champion for what that's worth, and a very, very talented agent as well, somebody who WWE put a lot of respect into. But it's good to see that Ring of Honor actually have a bubble in place for looking after people, especially with reports last week that Impact Wrestling have not been doing the greatest to look after their talent. In fact, apparently it's only went as far as questionnaires. Now, if a questionnaire is all you have, then there's probably an issue in terms of how good you are looking after things. Anyway, CM Punk was a guest on the Renee Paquette show this week. Oral Sessions, still think that's the greatest name for a radio show ever. And CM Punk for me is probably the character that I've associated most with in the modern era of wrestling. So to know that he's been away for as long as he has is shocking. Now, he did speak about his departure from WWE, what he's been up to since, noting that it was Renee who actually called CM Punk to join WWE backstage. Now, he says he misses the friendships that came with being on the road and the camaraderie that came with it. There's quite a few people who've said that they were friends with CM Punk, and when he left wrestling, he kind of ghosted them. And people are saying that pisses them off and shows that CM Punk's not a great guy. But at the same time, if mentally you're not in the correct place, you need to disassociate yourself from those people who are part of that bubble. And that's something that he kind of goes into. He says, what do I miss? To a point I'll speak on. When you reached out to me and you were like, hey, I heard Fox might want you to do this thing and it would be with me, and I hadn't spoken to you in ages, Punk said, people in the bubble don't speak to people outside the bubble. It's just the way it is. There's going to be exceptions to that rule, but more than likely, people in the bubble lose contact with those outside of it. And that's just life. Everyone there is on the road for so long, and it's hard to remain in contact with people outside the bubble. There's no way Fox wants me to do this, he said in relation to WWE show that Fox had. There's no way it would get approved. So that's one of the things I miss, Punk said. People like Renee, you're a peach. I'm not going to sit here and put you over, how cool you are. So obviously there's people that I miss, and I miss seeing friendly faces, although they were few and far between when you were there. You were one of them. You got me to come on this shit show. Now, CM Punk is somebody who, go out of your way to check out some of his shoot interviews. I may try and stick a YouTube link to a shoot interview with Samoa Joe that CM Punk did. And you can see his personality. You can see how funny he is. The one thing that's quite interesting, the joke that they made towards the end, if you haven't watched Oral Sessions, I'll just tell you, save you going out of your way. One of the things that's quite interesting is CM Punk chants at shows. They actually joked that to make the shows more authentic, they should actually pump in the CM Punk chants in the Thunderdome, because at least then we'd get to feel like we're actually watching a real wrestling show. Go out of your way, actually. I know I said you don't have to go out of your way to watch this, but if you're a CM Punk fan, go out of your way to watch this, because you get to see how good CM Punk is on screen. You get to see how his friendship with certain people. And obviously, a lot of people have said a lot of bad things about CM Punk distancing himself from wrestling and said that he's kind of lost some friends over it. But he does go into it a little bit when he talks about the fact that, like I was saying, those in the bubble, it's hard to stay in contact. I know what it's like being a university student. Sometimes I spend a couple of weeks not speaking to people because essentially what happens is you get so bogged down in your university work. It's been a couple of weeks and you think to yourself, right, I'll set aside an hour and have a wee conversation at the weekend, and then the weekend gets carried away, and then before you know it, it's 2-3 weeks down the line, and then you feel bad again, and then it's a vicious cycle. And I think when you're in that loop, if CM Punk has training sessions for a UFC fight, for example, and they happen to be whilst the WWE wrestler who he's friends with is on the road, they could actually end up sending a message here and there, but completely miss each other for 6 months at a time. So it's, people always assume that when you leave wrestling, that the WWE tell you not to speak to people, but I think it's just the schedule sometimes can make it a bit difficult. And it's interesting to hear people talk about that, because we always assume that if you're friends with somebody, you're friends for life. But I can be honest and say that I've been friends with certain people and had periods of not talking to them, but you just kind of fall back into it. They're brothers, most of these people, and sisters. Let's be clear, they're brothers and sisters. So once you're on the road, there's a relationship there that I have to believe it's hard to break. Now, let's look at one of the things that's quite interesting. So AEW had Kenny Omega win the belt. They then had him show up on Impact, and Access TV and Impact are bragging the show was watched by over 750,000 people when you combine Access TV, Twitch, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Now, the one thing that Scott D'Amore, he's an intelligent guy, he obviously wants to hype up this number because it's huge. But he says it's hard to compare apples and oranges. Some digital media provide better watch data than others, but we feel confident over 750,000 US-based fans watched the episode in the first 24 hours, and 1 million fans have clicked on various highlights we've put on social media. Great interaction levels, particularly if they were to put sponsorship and stuff through these, the money would be quite good. In addition to that, obviously, as you get into the high viewership figures, you do get more money from YouTube and Twitch and stuff. So hopefully this is a positive for Impact. What was actually presented with Kenny Omega was, for me, not very good, but we will not be talking about Impact this week because I haven't really watched it, but we will be talking about the other shows. Now, when it comes to wrestling, one of the things that's quite interesting is when people spin off into doing other things, and Disney announced this week that Ronda Rousey will be hosting a new series on ESPN Plus. It's apparently a 9-part documentary series built around Tom Brady's first-hand account of the journey to each of his 9 Super Bowls, and it's going to be called Man in the Arena, and it's hosted by Ronda Rousey, apparently. So that's kind of cool. There's several people involved in hosting it. The panel includes Eli Manning, Peyton Manning, Abby Wambach, and David Ortiz. So a very sports-based presentation for that documentary. And you know what? Documentaries have been one of the things that have kind of got me through lockdown. So it's cool to see people still want to put that out there because it's about knowledge, and for me that's important. I'm a huge fan of the documentaries that WWE are doing, so grab your way to check out the Lana one, which I did mention a few weeks ago, and there's also the day of Hell in a Cell with the Uso backstage stuff, which is just incredible. To get access to this stuff it's just insane that we get to see this. Now, let's talk about Sting and AEW because we did skip last week. Sting and AEW reached a multi-year deal that will see him appearing regularly. Now, apparently he signed the deal about a month ago, and Sting's WWE Legends deal expired earlier in the year. And roughly several weeks before the deal was signed with AEW, WWE pulled all of Sting's merchandise. To be honest, I think this is more of a merchandising deal for AEW in terms of like this will sell a lot of shirts and generate a lot of money. I don't know how fans of AEW can reconcile the fact that signing Goldberg is bad. He's a legend that can't really go. Well, Sting has a career-ending injury, according to several doctors. So can he really go? They're talking about him fighting. If he does, it'd be great. I will probably watch it, because I'll be intrigued to see what happens. But how many people will be watching because of the car crash element of what if he gets hurt? What if something happens? What if he's given the all clear by the same AEW doctors that allowed Matt Hardy to continue with a concussion? Just saying, it's not always as clear cut as people think. And WWE especially have been very clear in that they won't let people wrestle unless they are 100%, or at least as close to 100%. Now, one of the people that have quite intrigued me, I'm a fan of his work. Watched him on some old school NWA shows. When I say NWA, I don't mean the proper old school NWA. I mean like when there was just little small companies that used the letters NWA a few years ago. Jackson Riker is, for me, a great talent. He made some controversial comments about Black Lives Matter and Donald Trump, and people were saying that, you know, his comments about Donald Trump should get him fired by WWE. Well, here's the problem. There are several people in WWE who also believe that Black Lives Matter is not all it's made out to be. I'm not taking a side in this. I'm not making comments about this. But there are several people who've made comments that you can see they perhaps aren't fully on board with the movement. But no company who has the wife of the owner on Donald Trump's team can sack somebody for being a Trump supporter. That makes no sense. Vince McMahon's a Trump supporter. He's not going to leave. Certainly not over being a Trump supporter. But WWE have been very clever to step back from mentioning Donald Trump because, previous presidents they've had on, they haven't had Donald Trump on at all, even though they would have access to him very easily. But it's interesting to see that Jackson Ryker did make a return, and he returned as a follower of Elias. So, I know they're basing it. I think what's happened here is they're just basing it purely on the beard. The Forgotten Sons returned on SmackDown. Everybody wondered what was going to be happening with Jackson Ryker. There is a talent there. If he has controversial views, maybe they could remind him of his duty as part of the company. But they don't have to form part of what his performance is. Certainly, you can easily argue AJ Styles has views probably more controversial. If you don't know what I'm talking about, certainly look into some of the controversial views of AJ Styles and you may think differently of him. But that's one of the things that's quite interesting. I think right now we're also worried about what everybody else's opinion is. Have your own opinion. Make sure that you know all the information about that opinion and you're aware of what the other side is, and don't give a crap about what other people think. Don't try and get people fired because they don't agree with you. Don't try and cause trouble for people over stuff like this because it's crazy. We're all going to disagree on things. Politically, I'm most definitely going to disagree with some of the people who are watching this video. I'm not going to tell you where to go. I'm not going to tell you that you're wrong. I will disagree with you, but you're not wrong. Because if you believe something, then that's your belief. As long as you're not a few weeks ago to suddenly disappear again. And apparently it's because he knows he'd have to quarantine for 2 weeks, which has just been cut today to 10 days. But he'd have to quarantine, and then you'd have to quarantine on the other end as well. So he wanted to be home for Christmas. So he has missed some shows. Certainly, if he's over there and you know this is coming, you'd pre-tape some stuff so he's at least on the show every week. Even if you were to just tape some backstage segments and just have the chance for somebody else to stay at home for a few weeks. That, for me, would be a better use than just randomly sending them home. For me, Pac is a great wrestler, but that stop-start element of what they're doing with him in AEW, hopefully he gets booked on some more shows in the UK next year, and we can enjoy him here in the United Kingdom. I certainly know that our sponsors, CWF, are very much going to be interested in booking him due to a conversation we had. He is definitely on the list of talent that they're interested in if he's allowed to work shows. Now, if you watched AEW, there is a brief mention by Chris Jericho that Santana didn't show up to work. That's how unhappy he is. And he actually did release a statement on Instagram saying that his pride won't let him go down. Life's hit him with a few knockout punches. But basically, he's taking time off. He's having some time with his family and looking after himself. And you know what? If anybody out there, from the sounds of what's happening, he's going through some life struggles and he may be just, the AEW are being supportive of him, which is exactly what you want from an employer. So if anything comes from this, hopefully we can see that Santana will come back. He'll be fighting fit and raring to go. But in the meantime, I think they're going to find ways to kind of mention him on TV over the next few weeks and keep him alive, at least in spirit. Certainly think that him and his tag partner are very good. I think there's a lot of potential there for them to leave the Inner Circle and do things. That's clearly where the Inner Circle is going. Anyway, so WrestleMania 37, which is apparently taking place in Hollywood, they apparently have some matches lined up. Now, let's be honest, the matches that were announced are not very good. If you haven't seen the matches that were announced, they are Reigns versus Goldberg, Edge versus Orton, Drew McIntyre versus Brock Lesnar versus Keith Lee. Now, one of the discussions I had with our sponsor this week was he's not interested in Reigns versus Goldberg, and I'm inclined to agree with him. Edge versus Orton, we've seen it. We need to move on. And Drew McIntyre versus Brock Lesnar, we wouldn't want to see again. We've already seen it. and Keith Lee added into there for a triple threat. Is that really going to do anything box office? I don't know. I don't think Keith Lee is perhaps going to be ready for that spot this quickly. I do like him. I do think there's a lot of marketable value in somebody like Keith Lee. I certainly think this might be a bit too early, but these are just working plans, and I think the variables that are here. Would Brock appear on another WrestleMania behind closed doors? I know AEW have got fans there, and there is an attempt to get fans involved more in their shows in the next few weeks. WWE appear to be planning for the night after WrestleMania to be the first night they have a full attendance. So perhaps this WrestleMania could be something a little bit different. Where now I had this idea. They did it over 2 nights, and I had this idea that this year's WrestleMania, they obviously can't do 70,000, 80,000, but they could go 2 nights again this year. And if they went 2 nights, Reigns versus The Rock on night 1, and Drew McIntyre versus Brock Lesnar, perhaps. I know I said that you probably wouldn't want to see that again, but talking about getting a marquee match each night and having it in a big arena with some degree of social distancing so that we have that WrestleMania feel, but it would be slightly different. I mean, that could work. They did it 2 nights this year. I think if they were going to do it 2 nights again, you have to fill that venue with the vaccine and various other things that are around. There is every chance that could be a positive, and we could have fans in attendance at WrestleMania. I'm very interested, and I'm very hopeful that they change those matches. Certainly would like to see Roman Reigns versus The Rock. I think Edge as a wrestler, I mean, this is going to sound off the wall, but I'd love to see him against The Fiend. Randy Orton, I think, versus Keith Lee at WrestleMania. That would be a huge match for Keith Lee, and certainly one where you couldn't pick who was going to win. And for Drew McIntyre, honestly, I think the WWE is struggling to build talent for Drew. And I think obviously Sheamus could be an option for him. But you know what? I honestly think the best opponent for Drew McIntyre at next year's WrestleMania, and if I call this, then I'm gonna feel very happy. But John Cena. Drew McIntyre versus John Cena, where John Cena tries to get that belt one last time and Drew beats him at WrestleMania. That would be huge, and I think that would be something I would love to see. They certainly need to give Drew somebody who's going to help him and get him over. Now, talking of help, Bobby Fish has undergone tricep surgery following War Games. We're going to talk about War Games in a minute. The one thing about War Games is always somebody gets injured. We did have an injury in the women's match as well. For me, there's a problem when people are getting injured this much in matches. It used to be about people being able to continue and go and wrestle the next town. I know we're getting a different schedule with the pandemic and stuff, but to see that he's injured again, and he's not a young guy, so an operation like this is not a great thing for him to be getting. There's no timetable for his return. It is a bit of a shame that, again, he's dealing with an injury, but hopefully one that he will return from very quickly, even if he doesn't return instantly to the ring. Having him back there as part of the team would be a huge deal for NXT. Certainly, I think Bobby Fish is part of that dynamic. Now, making his return this week to NXT UK, which we don't normally talk about, but go out of your way, there's some great wrestling on there, was Tyler Bate. One of the things that was interesting was he did actually not win. And that's not the biggest thing. He's returned looking like he's been living homeless during the entire pandemic. I'm not making a joke about people being homeless, because I would never joke about people being homeless. But he does look like he's been living homeless the whole time. Tyler Bate's a relatively attractive man. I'm not that way inclined. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But now he just looks homeless. Hopefully there's a story to tell there. But on NXT this week, you did have Jordan Devlin against Oliver Carter for the NXT Cruiserweight Gold. You then had Isla Dawn versus Xia Brookside. So I'm a big fan of Isla Dawn. Saw her live at Square Go. Zaya Brookside, I'm a big fan of as well. And they're both so young. There's so much potential there for them to have a nice long career. But they're both very good in the ring. Grab your way to check that one out. It's actually quite a good match. The NXT UK brand has a lot of UK talent that people are saying it's ripped the heart out of the UK scene. There's quite a few guys and girls across the UK that are very, very exciting. So go out of your way, check out NXT UK this week. There is a couple of good matches on there. Not a massive fan of the presentation of some people. Certainly Tyler Bate needs to have a wash and a shave. But other than that, it was a very, very good show. It's one of those shows where I tend to watch NXT UK on the way to work. So I'll be kind of watching and listening. But a few of the matches this week had me just constantly watching, particularly the Tyler Bate one. Interesting to see how well he performed on his return. Now, when we look at returns, we have to end with possibly the biggest return in the history of wrestling, Eva Marie. Yeah, I know. I'm baffled as well. Apparently, she's returning to WWE. She's been under contract for a couple of months. She's been back in the Performance Center trying to get ring ready. And apparently, they have creative plans for her. Mike Johnson of PW Insider, rather, he has said that her name is on the creative list. So if you're on the creative list, the creative team can use you. And that means that they're just trying to come up with the proper way to bring her back in. Certainly, I think Eva Marie coming in, she's not a big name. But the fact that she's being talked about means WWE want her to be a big name. And I wouldn't be surprised if they were the ones putting out the story that she's coming back. What's she going to do when she comes back? I really liked the idea when they were building up to her first match and she kept finding reasons not to wrestle. That really is an inspirational storyline for being able to protect somebody who maybe isn't quite ready and needs to get some time to get ready. But that is talking about getting ready. That is the wrestling news this week. This is Headlocks and Headphones. Give us a like, subscribe so you can get the videos every week. Coming up in just a minute, we're going to talk about TakeOver, Raw, NXT, and AEW, but we're not going to go in depth with these. We're going to talk about them in short form because I do have something I want to talk about at the end. Now, when it comes to talking about these weekly shows, I normally have my producer do AEW. This week, I watched AEW and NXT because I wanted to kind of see the difference between the two and find out which one, personally, I felt was better. I know some of you are not going to agree with how I feel about what the better show was this week, but that's fine. Wrestling's subjective. We don't have to agree. But if you disagree with me, you're wrong. So now we are in the show review section. Now, this is the part where I kind of gave mixed signals earlier where I said that it was a good week for wrestling. By that, what I mean is that there's a lot of content to digest this week. There's a lot of things happened. There's NXT TakeOver, and that immediately followed the title change on the AEW show, the arrival of Sting, and various other things. Now, we kind of had to take a step back last week due to medical issues for myself. So I had a little bit more time to sit and watch some wrestling. I'm kind of on my ass all week. So it's been kind of great in one sense, but also really bad in another. Now, the one thing about NXT is that their takeovers are always good. But let's be honest, I'm usually quite critical of certain things, and I'm going to be critical here. The commentary on NXT is awful. Wade Barrett shouts all the time. Beth Phoenix seems so forced. It's not great. I'm not a fan of the presentation of this. Now, let's talk about the pre-show match. Del Fantasma defeat Santos Escobar, Raul Mendoza, Joaquin Wilde defeated Kurt Stallion, Shanti Adonis, and August Gray in a very short blah match, basically a pre-show match. That's essentially all it was. The main show began with Team Candice LeRae, Dakota Kai, Raquel Gonzalez, and Toni Storm versus Shotzi Blackheart, Ember Moon, Rhea Ripley, and Io Shirai. And to be honest, this had all the promise in the world of being very good. You know, there's Rhea Ripley, Toni Storm, who I'm fans of both, and not just in the sense that I think they're gorgeous, but they're two of the best female workers WWE have. And Toni Storm recently has got to do some promos and show her heel side, and she is better as a heel. I was excited going into this one, but for me, it demonstrated everything that's wrong with some of modern wrestling for me. There was far too many weapons, basically too many spots that were just done for the sake of the spot. For example, when Rhea Ripley had a hammer and she hit, I believe it was Dakota Kai twice with a hammer, Dakota Kai stood up. If I hit you with a hammer and you stand up, rest assured I'm hitting you harder the next time. It's a hammer. What in the actual hell is... Why are people standing up from a hammer shot? Then you had countless other moments where things were being thrown around randomly, weapons, all these things. And the problem was, it just seemed like a series of spots. And for me, I hate that. Be prepared for that same point to crop up when we talk about AEW. The spot matches are horrible. They have zero interest for me. And some of the risks that these people were taking make no sense whatsoever. Not as bad as the time that Jeff Hardy swantoned onto a table whilst the steps were there. So he had no choice but to hit his head off the steps. Clever. We're talking about a pay-per-view, and this was a spot fest. The War Games used to, for me anyway, they used to be one of those things that really ended a big feud. I don't think the women's match here deserved a War Games match. I'm not insulting any of the workers. They're all very good. In fact, my least favorite worker is Candice LeRae, and people love her. I don't, but people do. For me, this match was way overbooked, far too much stuff happening. What it called for would have been a traditional 4-on-4 rather than a War Games. It was too much. We did get a really good match, Tommaso Ciampa versus Timothy Thatcher, where they did this thing that to me stood out because it was called bloody wrestling. They had a wrestling match. And yeah, it did go down some indie routes here and there. But for all intents and purposes, it was a wrestling match. That was great. I loved that match. I certainly think Tommaso Ciampa's promo work is even better now than it was at his supposed peak, because he's no longer playing a character. I genuinely feel this jaded Tommaso Ciampa. This is how he is. So I love that. Now, I'm a big fan of Dexter Lumis, and Cameron Grimes seems to be very good. Certainly on the mic. I think they've given him some stupid stuff to do, but that's kind of the slack-jawed yokel character that they've given him. Dexter Lumis, the slow, methodical character, it fits better with a heel. I think they need to change that character up. I don't think this needed a strap match. This was just for the sake of it. And this is where we then lead into Johnny Gargano, who defeated Damian Priest and Leon Ruff. I know Jim Cornette calls him Johnny Sameface, and I do like Johnny Gargano. I think Johnny Gargano's in-ring ability is incredible. I think his matches against Tommaso Ciampa, his match against Adam Cole, and various matches he's had have shown how talented he is. And it's clear Triple H and Shawn Michaels like him. My problem is there was one star in that match, and they made him look like garbage, and that was Damian Priest. We'll find out when we talk about NXT. I really do like Damian Priest. But Johnny Gargano won the championship. There was also a run-in from Austin Theory, who's in the ghost face mask from Scream. Then we go into the Undisputed Era versus Team McAfee. Now, a lot of the stuff here was good. There was a lot of good action, and particularly when Roderick Strong came in, what you had was just this... It was almost as if the pace kind of picked up a little bit. But they did have some genuine wrestling. Kyle O'Reilly and Pete Dunne had a good exchange. There was some pieces in there that were very good. There was one stupid moment where they tried to put Pete Dunne through Oney Larkin on a table, and Pete Dunne rolled off to go and sell. And then when I believe it was Roderick Strong decided, no, I'll jump off the top rope. For some reason, Pete Dunne climbed back on Oney Larkin. That made no sense to me. It really stood out as being quite stupid. There was cricket bats involved with Danny Birch. He's English, so he has to use cricket bats apparently, which meant they had to fucking go and import them. Stupid. The War Games match with weapons for me is not something I'm a fan of. Overall, very disappointing show in many aspects. However, I don't think any performer themselves were actually they were bad. I think part of the problem is just overbooking the matches, having far too much in there. And something that you'll hear me say about AEW was just everybody was kicking out of everything and everything made no sense. And that's a problem when stuff stops making sense, because I want to be involved. I want to be drawn in. And just that main event, Undisputed Era versus Team McAfee, the matches themselves, in terms of the in-ring ability, these guys are great. But when you start kicking out of everything and you start making things mean nothing, I'm not a fan of that for several reasons. But importantly, because anybody who's not a fan watching it instantly goes, well, this is fake. And yeah, we know it's not real. But the whole point of watching is that we're meant to believe for those few minutes that it is. Now, we'll move on from that and we'll look at Raw. I don't want to talk too in depth about Raw, but there's a few things I certainly feel we need to address. One of them is the fact that Drew McIntyre has that sword. I think it's goofy, but I'm Scottish, so I love swords. It's cool. I think when you look at how Raw is, there's a lot of positives. They're establishing people. Now, there is a rumor. Remember, I mentioned Eva Marie. There was a rumor that Angel Garza's girl that he is flirting with in the network exclusives that are happening during Raw is Eva Marie. It's a red rose. Eva Marie, all red everything. That's a fairly simple link to make, particularly when she's talking about roses on her social media. But in terms of the in-ring stuff, there's some good stuff happening on Raw, just not at the same level we're getting everywhere else. Asuka defeated Shayna Baszler. Ricochet and Dana Brooke defeated Slapjack and Reckoning. The cool thing here, though, was that we saw the leader of Retribution, actually, Mustafa Ali. He actually came and was very angry at Slapjack and Reckoning for losing, saying that they were letting him down. I think there's a lot still to be done with Retribution. I like the idea that he's given them a chance and they're failing, because there's the opportunity to turn them around, but there's also the opportunity to replace them. And if you replace them, there are people that could step in and you instantly have them win and go over everybody. And from day one, you would have an instant change to that faction. I'm a huge, huge fan of Mustafa Ali, or Mustafa. I would love to see Retribution push him up the card. We did see the Pat Patterson Memorial, and through the show, we saw videos of him, one of which was him singing a Frank Sinatra song and some tributes from all the wrestlers that have worked with him over the years. Pat Patterson has some allegations against him in the past. I think wrestling has a great ability to forget them. I'm the kind of person that I want to remember the negatives of people because I don't want to just forget about them. They're important. But there's a lot of people whose careers were made better by Pat Patterson. His ability to put together a match, the Royal Rumble, for example, it was his concept. The Intercontinental title was given to him. He was the first ever Intercontinental champion. When you watch shoot interviews with guys like Shawn Michaels, Bret Hart, the level of respect they have for Pat Patterson and the ability to just see the finer details of matches puts him at a level above a lot of people who are agents. So he's not been full-time for a while. I know he has offered advice to wrestlers over the years since he has stepped back from his full-time job. So he's definitely been a great influence in wrestling. And karmically, he doesn't have a clean slate, but certainly a massive influence on the wrestling business, and somebody who you can tell from the level of tribute that's been paid that Vince McMahon felt this one as well. Now, we did see Kofi Kingston defeat Shelton Benjamin, and then we saw Cedric Alexander defeat Kofi. This kind of one-upmanship contest is great. Getting to see Cedric Alexander beat a former world champion for me, it's huge. And showed, although, yeah, there is the side point that Kofi had already wrestled against Shelton Benjamin, who is a collegiate athlete who trained Brock Lesnar. He's a stallion for going in against Cedric Alexander as well, but it does show Cedric Alexander is liked enough that he can get that win. There was, of course, the leg injury for Kofi, and that was played on by Cedric Alexander. But a win against a world champion is still huge. We then saw AJ Styles, The Miz, and John Morrison defeat Drew McIntyre and Sheamus in a 2-on-3 match. There was a kick from Sheamus, a brogue kick on Drew McIntyre. We came back from the break and we saw Sheamus backstage basically saying, I didn't mean it, but we both know what Drew's way to do when he comes back here. And they ended up fighting until Pat Buck decided to step between them. They decided to put him through a table. And then Drew looked and went, pint. And they went to get a pint. Not before Sheamus said, well, you're buying this time, you cheap bastard, which for me was hilarious. And you could tell from Drew's reaction, either he didn't know it was coming or they knew the word bastard was going to go out on live television and they couldn't do anything about it. Either way, I was very impressed. I like this Drew and Sheamus dynamic, and I think they're going to do a lot of fun things with it. We did see Bobby Lashley defeat Jeff Hardy, but for me, the cool thing here was Riddle backstage, who came up to Jeff Hardy as he's away to go out, and he has his bro nuts, which is donuts with the word bro in front. Bro nuts? Anyway, and he's talking about he wants to make a team with Jeff Hardy, and he knows the Hardy Boys, but he wants to be the Hardy Bros. And I like that. It's funny. There's some humor there. And Jeff's like, my music's playing. I've got to go. And Riddle just kept saying, yeah, man, but I really want to talk about this team. And then he said, I'm going to eat, I'll just have to eat more bro nuts for me. So he starts eating a donut. He ends up coming out and trying to help Jeff. And he ends up stopping what would have been a longer beatdown on Jeff Hardy. I'm intrigued where this Riddle and Jeff Hardy thing is going to go. I think there's certainly the ability for them to team up, which inevitably will lead to Riddle turning heel, but hopefully not, because I do like the idea that he's just this goofy. Like every time I look at him, I'm like, I want to hate you so much, but there's just something about that gimmick that makes me attracted to the gimmick, not the person, the gimmick. Now, we did see Bray Wyatt versus Randy Orton in the main event, and I did think during the show, I wonder when they're going to use a cut-in rather than just trying to keep using special effects. And the producer, Zoe Styles, was asleep when I watched Raw, which tends to happen quite a lot. But she was asleep, and I'm sitting there thinking, they could do a cut-in here at some point where the Fiend shows up, and that's how Bray Wyatt wins. The problem for me was it was obviously a cut-in because they didn't have the audience in the background, so we knew it wasn't live, because you can't have a live audience because people can see themselves. It's goofy, but it worked. It's not even the goofiest thing that happened on Raw. Randy Orton's in his dressing room. There's a knock at the door. Nobody's there. He opens the door, doesn't see anybody. The door closes, and then it reopens, and there's Rambling Rabbit puppet at the door. It was stupid. It was silly. It's goofy. It kind of works with the Firefly Funhouse, not so much the rest of the time. No Alexa Bliss on Raw this week. It's apparently she was away filming a sitcom with Charlotte. It's not their sitcom. They're guest starring. I kind of prefer Alexa Bliss as part of this. I think this whole gimmick and storyline that Bray and Randy Orton have.
Wikipedia. In politics, a political party is an organized group of people who have the same ideology or who otherwise have the same.
Alexa, stop. This is what happens when you have one of those devices. I'm not going to delete that because that's actually quite funny. Anyway, if you are going to have a podcast of your own and you are going to talk about WWE and you want to mention Miss Bliss, then don't have Alexa in the same room. So let's talk about AEW, because that for me is the next show. And I do want to talk about NXT. We'll talk about that next. We opened with the Young Bucks versus Hybrid 2. A lot of people were excited by this. I personally did not enjoy this match at all. Lots of just spots for the sake of it. Lots of finishers that ended up not being finishers. One of the Bucks had one of Hybrid 2 in a tombstone, and the other one dove from the ring outside to catch them and do the super tombstone on the outside the ring. That wasn't a finish. We also had a submission hold on one of the Bucks, and the other member of Hybrid was standing making sure that it couldn't be broken up. Referee opts not to do the count to get this person out the ring because apparently, well, it's needed for the story, so let's just forget about the rules. And then when Buck tries to get in the ring, this person just jumps out the ring. And then the swanton, and that's not a finisher. A swanton onto a person who's doing a submission hold, that would be a cool way to end the match. Nope, kicks out. Then, not 90 seconds later, the referee decides to start counting to 5 to get somebody out the ring. Why didn't you do that a few minutes ago? AEW fans especially seem ever so willing to forget the screw-ups and forget the fact that some of this stuff just is ridiculous and makes no sense because they want to enjoy it. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if anybody wants to sit and tell me the Young Bucks versus Hybrid 2 is a great match, it was a spectacle. The moves they were doing were good. But if everybody kicks out of everything all the time, then nothing matters. I get FTR versus the Young Bucks, you kick out of a finisher because this matters. It's important. But the opening match on a Dynamite is not important. And for me, that is why the Young Bucks are massively overrated. And you can see in some of the ratings, a lot of people did not enjoy this match. And the problem is that the selling isn't good. If you go to Bleacher Report and look at their review, they're talking about the same thing. There was no selling. The pacing was awful. You couldn't tell which side was legal. Most of the time, there were issues in terms of who, and the referee lacked control. Some fans will like it. Other fans will hate it. I fall into the hate category. If you like it, that's fine. Wrestling's subjective. I keep saying this. Wrestling's subjective. It's meant to be fun. That was not fun. We then had Sting coming out, and he said that Darby Allin seemed familiar because he was sitting up in the crowd with white face paint and stuff. Cody said he'd been waiting a long time to share a ring with Sting, and Sting said he plans to be on AEW for a long time, and he'll see you around, kid. Rather condescending from a veteran to a younger guy. But for me, the bigger issue here was you had Sting in the ring. It achieved nothing. Didn't tell us why he was here, which is kind of what we were told for a week. And again, you look at some of the reviews, people are saying, it was great to see him, but he didn't really tell us anything. So if you're writing a script and you want to move the plot along, there needs to be an event, an action, a beat. And there was nothing there. They tried to give us a moment, but without anything to actually be momentous. So we saw a promo with the Tully Blanchard telling FTR that the reason that they lost the belts was because Tully wasn't there. As a unit, they're perfect. If one of them falls, then they all fall. And I like that idea. I think there is a very cool idea when it comes to the FTR, which is that they are old-fashioned wrestlers. Tully Blanchard mocked all the flips, and I think it was Scott Dawson who actually said, silly Jungle Boy, because he's one of the guys that does all the high-flying moves. I liked that. I didn't really like the fact that, for me, this match came across as just a throwaway jobber match. Great to see Brian Pillman, but yeah, it just came across as a bit of a jobber match. For me, I think there was high-flying moves from Pillman and Garrison, because that's kind of what they do, but they were able to kind of draw back a little bit and work the FTR style, and that made this match probably one of the better tag matches I've seen, because they were at least trying to maintain some fundamentals. Dustin Rhodes is always good. I'm never going to criticize him. I've seen some critiques that his Bulldog finisher is a little basic. A Bulldog as a finisher works. If I bang your head into something really hard, it will knock you out. And that's what Bulldog does. He is looking good for his age, looking good for a man half his age. Dustin is a great in-ring performer, and he defies his age. The ultimatum with the Inner Circle, which saw more Sammy Guevara, MJF stuff happening, and even the funny bit between Hager and Wardlow, where Jake Hager lisped his way through the "Why is he looking at me?" to Wardlow, and Wardlow's like, "Well, what do you mean I'm looking at you?" Which would have been better if they both didn't have microphones, so it was clear that was the script, that was the plan. If instead of that, we just had the ring mic'd up and we heard it, I would have felt a lot more organic with this. People critiquing WWE for things being too projected and too obvious seem only too willing to allow AEW to project things and make things obvious. The MJF Guevara stuff's cool. I think Guevara's getting a babyface turn. MJF is going to kind of do a rock and take over this faction. I really like the way that will go, but obviously that depends on if they do it. There was then this weird cluster, the Lucha Brothers and Lance Archer versus Eddie Kingston, the Butcher, and the Blade. The Butcher, honestly, looks incapable of functioning. The guy looks like the alcoholic that stumbles his way down the road. He is, however, a very talented wrestler. His appearance looks bad. I was not a fan of this match at all. I see other people are. There were some cheap shots from Bunny. The referee conveniently didn't see. And then Archer destroyed everyone. Why, if you have a guy like Archer, why are you burying him in these multi-person matches rather than having him going over every week? For me, it doesn't make sense for Lance Archer to be just kind of buried in this. A lot of the people in this match, sadly, were just kind of afterthoughts. And it's almost like AEW, they throw these matches out there because they think people will like them. And it's fine because their fans seem to. The problem is that the point of matches is not matches for matches' sake. It should be to either build interest or to get the story moving. And Butcher and the Blade were there for no reason at all, although they were involved in the finish. They could have been out of this match and it would have been better. And then we had Abaddon versus Tesha Price. Really like Abaddon in the gimmick. I think it's cool. This match was horrible. She sat up like the Undertaker at one point, and then the opponent made the escape. For me, and I'm going to come across as trying to be controversial here, I don't get the Kenny Omega hype. Yes, he is very capable in the ring. People are saying that the segment he did was an A segment. It was the best segment they've seen in AEW for a long time. I'm sorry. That was awful. The promo from Kenny Omega was awful. It was fake. It was stunted. There was no sincerity there at all. And I know people say he's a heel. He's not supposed to be sincere. But there's the old mantra of sincerity is everything. Once you can fake that, you've got it made. He still needs to be believable. And he's not. He isn't believable. Don Callis is a great promo, and Don Callis did his best to get across the point that needed to be made. The problem is Kenny Omega didn't. I did not feel that we gained anything from this. The problem for Kenny Omega is that one of the problems with AEW fans is they argue that just suddenly calling back to something is long-term storytelling. Long-term storytelling is not just mentioning something that happened a year ago. Long-term storytelling is not what AEW have been good at all. Name a character that has developed. It hasn't. Because what Kenny Omega's done is reverted to his old gimmick. So he changed gimmick and worked for a year with that gimmick and then changed back. The problem is that the entire time they've been trying to build him, they already had the match between Page and Omega on pay-per-view where Omega was the babyface. But he came out as a heel and wrestled as a heel. Foreshadowing. That's not long-term storytelling. That's foreshadowing. And when people talk about WWE foreshadowing with Sheamus and Drew, and the fact that potentially we will see Sheamus turn on Drew. That is foreshadowing. And people will say, yeah, foreshadowing is a bad thing, and foreshadowing is something that WWE do all the time. But what if that's the narrative? You think the worst in Sheamus, and yeah, they may fight, yeah, they may argue, but they're still going to be friends. And this is the point I want to make, because I'm going to mention him by name. JJ Andrews is a long-term friend of mine, and we've fought. We've not spoken for a long time. We've become friends again. We were always friends. We physically fought. At one point, I believe he almost broke my jaw. I've separated his shoulder. JJ Andrews and me have physically fought. But we're still friends. Because anger is momentary. The problem with the Kenny Omega character is they've already told us that he's part of the company. And now he's part of the company and he wasn't using nepotism to get his friend jobs. But that's all that's happened in AEW. They're trying to use the frustration that people have about AEW as a storyline, which might be a good thing. But the problem is that I just don't feel like AEW have enough to justify that. Now, one last thing before we start talking about NXT is Tony Schiavone is probably on the highest paid contract he's ever had from a wrestling company, and he shows up in jeans and a body warmer. I'm sorry, but that's unprofessional. And the fact that Tony Khan is willing to allow his broadcasters to show up like that, because I'll guarantee you now, JR shows up and he wears something professional. He wears a suit. He wears something that makes him look like he gave a shit. And that, I think, sometimes is the problem. I think Tony Schiavone, he cares, but he looks like he doesn't, and he wants to seem like he doesn't. And that's a problem. Now, with NXT, we'll fire through this quickly because I know we are running short of time. We opened up with Finn Balor cutting a promo that was interrupted by Pete Dunne. Kyle O'Reilly then came out, and Kyle comes across really well. But for me, Damian Priest came out and started talking with Finn Balor, and this looked like The Rock in the ring with Authors of Pain and Drake Maverick. There's some talent there, certainly, but The Rock stood out a mile in most of the segments he was in, and that's the same with Damian Priest. He stood out big time. Now, Finn Balor kind of made a quick exit, and we saw the priestess Scarlett come out and walk around and kind of remind us that Karrion Kross existed. And Finn Balor did say, just let Karrion know that I'm here whenever he wants, which may be prophetic words. Jake Atlas defeated Isaiah Swerve Scott, which, by the way, I did not see that coming. I thought Swerve Scott was going to get it. Grizzled Young Veterans defeated Ever-Rise and Imperium. Imperium kind of almost seemed like a throwaway here. Ever-Rise, I'm very big fans of. I think there's going to be a lot for them in the future. But the Grizzled Young Veterans doing what Grizzled Young Veterans do. They made the best of a bad situation and they won that match with a very cool finisher, which basically was a throw into a code breaker. I'm a big fan of Zach Gibson. I'm very excited to see them do well. We saw Malcolm Bivens make a proposition for Tyler Rust, which isn't his first one. He's trying to get clients. I like this. I think I said this on one of the early shows. Managers vying for clients is going to be very, very cool. Tommaso Ciampa defeated Cameron Grimes in what was a very cool match. I love Ciampa's entrance gear. I think it looks very Robocop-y, but it's very cool. And we saw, obviously, Timothy Thatcher at ringside who injured Cameron Grimes, which could be just an excuse to get them off TV. Karrion Kross returned and attacked Damian Priest. We saw Pete Dunne defeat Killian Dane. Raquel Gonzalez defeated Ember Moon. Now, this is the part I want to talk about. There was a segment where we had Johnny Gargano come out with Austin Theory. What's her name? I can't remember the girl's name. It went completely out of my head. But the faction that Johnny Gargano has, and a lot of times, every time Johnny Gargano spoke, We saw his wife basically kind of repeat some of the lines from it, and there was little bits of comedy between Austin Theory and Johnny Gargano, and talk about the fact that they hadn't rehearsed things. And a lot of people were saying that this looked sloppy and stuff. I liked the fact that it came across like they hadn't rehearsed it, but you could tell they had. They put a lot of effort into making it look like they didn't put a lot of effort into it, and that for me is part of what's wrong. Had they just improvised stuff, then it probably would have come across a lot better. And this is the part that I do want to mention briefly before we go. We did see Candice LeRae come out with a cast on her arm. She's injured. Bobby Fish injured. Several other people carrying injuries. I believe Cameron Grimes is carrying a legitimate injury, and that's why they did the injury spot after his match against Tommaso Ciampa. War Games is very, very, very damaging every year. People end up taking time off, particularly Bobby Fish, who's at that age now where injuries are going to be a bit more. You would want to protect these people. And there is, of course, the broken... It looks like a broken wrist for Candice LeRae based on where the bandage is. But not a big loss. I'm not a fan of Candice LeRae. So hopefully NXT pick up on the idea that they don't want to be injuring people all the time, because there's a lot of injuries for them. And hopefully we can see NXT continue in the path. Personally, I think NXT was the better show. In terms of matches, they were better quality. In terms of characters I care about, there was more there. And in addition to that, I think there was a lot of pointlessness in AEW. You know, the opening match, which some people liked, some people hated, there was no story there. And for me, that's a problem. There's one cool thing, if you haven't seen it, it is available on the WWE website. If you go on, click on NXT, you can see Xia Li and Boa's penance continues. And basically, they're being taught by somebody, not taught, they're being instructed by somebody to continue with the physicality. And Xia Li is punching basically a frame, and her hands are bleeding, and Boa's being hit across the back, and his back's bleeding, and there's pain across his face, and there's blood and bruises and stuff. This runs the risk of being very stereotypical and racist, and the first thing I thought was this plays on this stereotype that this is all that happens in certain Asian countries. There's just loyalty to pain. The problem for me is always going to be the same, in the sense that if I can think that and I don't normally think that, then other people will. Xia Li and Boa are very, very talented, and I'm excited to see what they do with these guys on TV. Now, I think WWE are the better show. The problem for WWE especially is that NXT have more stars on their show. They are getting higher ratings, and people are saying that means they're the better product. What we need to remember is during the Attitude Era, WWE had the better product for over a year before the ratings reflected that. When you look at the shows, when WWE have a main event featuring Raquel Gonzalez, no offense to her, that demonstrates there is a more fluid nature to who can main event on an NXT show. The biggest name on that show was Finn Balor. Finn Balor's mainstream appeal is nowhere near Sting's. So yeah, the ratings are reflective, but the budget of each show is going to be drastically different. Remember, one's a performance center that runs shows. The other is a mainstream brand with national television. If you were to ask USA Network, would they be happy with the viewing figures NXT are getting? They would say yes. If you were to ask TNT if they're happy with the viewing figures they're getting, they would say yes. If you were to ask a bank manager to sit and look at these two companies, they would look at the financials and say, well, to be honest, for investors, the financial argument is more favorable with NXT because they don't have Sting. They don't have main event salaries, and they're still competing. If you think AEW are winning, then you're right. The ratings are higher the vast majority of weeks. But you look at the weeks where star power is dedicated onto NXT, like when Charlotte was put on, or when Keith Lee won the title, where they'd spent weeks building to this moment, they win the ratings war. And they win the ratings war without Sting. They win the ratings war without $1 million contracts for 6 or 7 guys on that roster. I'm telling you, people will tell you that AEW's the bigger brand. AEW's winning. AEW are beating a brand where I know for a fact at least one of the wrestlers, because I've spoken to him, is being paid $30,000 a year. And he is featured. So listen to what people are telling you, but take it with a pinch of salt. AEW might be winning the ratings war, but certainly NXT is the most successful.
Headlocks and Headphones does not endorse this advert, but it's damn sure approved by CWF.
So joining me for what is the sponsor section of the show today is CWF owner Stuart Murphy. Thank you for joining me, because this is the first time we've actually been on screen together since your interview. The reason I've actually called you today is to thank you for what has been the highest rated episode of Headlocks and Headphones ever. The episode where you went into a little bit of your story is the most watched episode ever, the most views and the most watch time as well. And you can go in and you can check out the sections and everything that's being watched. And it was your section that was the most watched. So people were interested in your story. So thank you for coming on and sharing it. That's it's important that people know they can go out and share their story when it's something that's negative.
Definitely, it's a big weight off my shoulders as well. So it's something I've been keeping in for over a year now. So it's definitely a big, massive weight off my shoulders now, and I feel like I'm finally ready to move forward with things.
Is this the drawing the line in the sand? If they want to, the people that you were speaking to, obviously the promotion know who they are because they were named. But if your trainer happened to watch and he wants to reach out to you and kind of draw the line in the sand and put all this in the past, that's something you're ready to do?
Definitely. I think it's important for people like myself or others that have been involved in speaking out. It's important for them to be the bigger person. If they saw it and decided to reach out and try and mend fences, I'd be willing to listen.
Great. Now, so you're talking about keeping stuff in. We have this little. You would use the word rat, but I would say a little birdie that keeps kind of giving me little stories about what's happening with CWF. Now, would you be willing to confirm what I've been told? Now, I'll tell you what I've been told, and you can confirm or deny these rumors. Show 1 is arranged, and the provisional date, pending obviously this pandemic nonsense that you've set aside, is for June of next year. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes. There would have been an announcement about it probably later on this week, so I have no issues with you saying that at all. But yeah, June is the provisional date, but obviously due to the pandemic, it's subject to change. Okay,
now the one bit that does kind of excite me, and I'm not a massive fan of tournaments when they happen all the time, AEW, what does intrigue me was the bit that I was told from my little mole, which is that you guys plan on having a one-night tournament for show 1 that is going to lead to an opportunity against, well, it's a relatively big star in the sense that this person has been on WrestleMania. This person has been involved in big storylines in big companies, and they are lined up to fight for your championship. Can you confirm or deny? Because I'm hoping you're going to tell me the name, because I've been told who the person is, but I've also been told not to say who it is because you may want to do this yourself.
I can confirm that there will be a one-night tournament. It will be an 8-man tournament. We will announce the 8 participants over the coming weeks once we have them cemented down. The winner will be facing an international star, in which we hope will be November of next year. But again, this is all dependent on when we can get show 1 up and running. But yeah, I can confirm there will be an international name coming in to compete in the first ever championship match. But at this point in time, I would rather the suspense of who this person could be kept.
Okay, so I know who this person is, and I will say I'm very excited that this person is coming to Scotland. The last time this person was in Scotland, they were in a match against somebody we both know, and the match was very good. So it's going to be interesting over the next. You're saying that you have a venue lined up, and you're getting everything the T's crossed and the I's dotted and everything ready to make an official venue announcement soon, and you're going to have talent being announced in the coming weeks.
Yes, I am just waiting finalisation of the venue that I have in mind, so I don't want to announce anything until that is 100%. And there will be talent announced in the coming weeks after that is announced.
And we can have access to them here on the show, right?
You can, yes. I'm happy for them to come on and do interviews with you. The only thing I'll suggest is that you ask the talent themselves. I can't speak for the talent. I can't make the talent do anything, so it's entirely up to themselves.
Interesting to hear a promoter who doesn't want to tell wrestlers everything they can do and take control of every part of their life. But thank you for joining us in the CWF sponsored section of the show.
Well, before we end the show, the reason I have no issues with wrestlers doing whatever they want is there's this unwritten rule that a lot of promoters seem to forget. Wrestlers are not employees, they are independent contractors. Therefore, it is entirely their decision who they work for, when they work, and what other side projects they do, and no one, whoever they are, has any right to tell them otherwise.
No, thank you for joining us.
No problem at all.